Hello, everyone. I got what an amazing audience. I can see on our chat that we have the whole world here. So I'm excited and humbled at the same time. So today I'm going to share some of best practices that I actually use in my own design process. And it's going to be a story of a design process that every single one of you can use, despite the size of a project or size of the team, every day. And with this process, you're going to gradually build your design system and treat it as a first-class citizen. Uh, okay. So I'm Martin. I'm CEO and co-founder at UXPin. I also run our design operations team. And my whole background's in UX design and psychology. And my passions are actually right at the intersection of design and technology. This is where I thrive. Day to day, I'm focused on our product strategy and the future of business, especially in connection to scaling design and development. So if you are wondering what is UXPin, UXPin is the full stack UX design platform, design systems, prototyping, and documentation together all in one place. We started the company in 2010, so it's been a while, with a very simple mission: connecting design and development. And to this day, this is the dream that we are chasing every single day. We have customers in over 150 countries. Our main focus is on enterprises such as PayPal or Sapient. But having that said, we have a large number of individuals and smaller companies using UXPin every single day to scale their design and development processes. The team consists of 70 amazing professionals across two offices: Mountain View, where I personally reside, and Gdańsk, Poland. If you would like to learn more about UXPin, I highly recommend just reading customer stories at uxpin.com/testimonials. And you'll find stories that are not only about implementation of UXPin, but actually about scaling design. So this is really in tune with what we are going to talk throughout the next 3 days at the conference. Okay. I always like to start my presentations, my talks with what are you going to take away from this whole experience? So there are 3 things that I really want to emphasize and tell you about, and hopefully they're going to be very practical for you as well. So the first thing is that the elements of systemic thinking in design are beneficial to a team and project of any size. It means that design systems are not only for big companies with big budgets and big teams. They're really for everyone, because they start with a very specific way of thinking about our practice and about our processes, and you can definitely apply that. Number 2, without the design system in place, scaling design leads to chaos. It's basically impossible. If you try, and I'm sure many of you, including myself, we tried it in the past and didn't work out. Design system gives us a unique opportunity to actually scale our processes and organizations in a very predictable and efficient way. And number 3, hopefully after this 40 minutes of a presentation and a little bit of a Q&A, you'll be ready to actually start your systemic design process right away. You are going to be able to implement it to your everyday practice. So 3 things. So very simple goal that I have in mind for this talk is to just tell you about these 3 things and inspire you to maybe readjust your design process to the reality of the systems and systemic thinking in design. Okay, the whole topic of this whole conference is scaling design practice. So let's talk about design at scale first as an introduction to the rest of what I'm going to tell you about. So scaling design is an interesting challenge, and it truly has 2 dimensions. So number 1, which is probably the dominant way of thinking about scaling design, is the growth of the team. How to scale design organization from the very first designer to hundreds of designers. How the processes change on the way there, and how our culture changes as well, how we can influence whole organization with a much powerful team. That's typically what people talk about when they are thinking about scale. But there's another dimension which is equally important, to say the least, which is the growth of the product. And a typical thing that I observed in my career in the past, but also whenever I'm talking to our customers is that uh, the expectation is that with the growth of the design organization, we're also giving our product portfolio more depth. We cover more use cases. We do it in a better way, more efficient way, and we're definitely growing the experience for our users. And UXPin is definitely an example of this kind of growth. So when we started in 2010, there was only 3 of us, and 2 out of 3 were designers. And we had the simplest solution, design solution on the market back then. UXPin paper prototyping notepad. 7 years passed really quickly, and today we have a team of 70 people with 6 designers on board. And we have the most powerful design solution on the market. So we definitely gained the scale when it comes to the size of the team, but also when it comes to the depth of the user experience. It is a completely different product, chasing the same mission, but with much more depth. And we are very proud of that. We love it. This is our true passion, just growing this experience for our users. However, sometimes growth actually has unexpected consequences, which are far from optimal. And it's chaos, growing pains. When we are scaling organizations, when we are scaling products, the chaos is very hard to avoid. And it usually starts, and all the problems in my professional experience starts with this single sentence. We have to do more and we have to do it faster, so let's grow our team. This is a very typical thing that we keep hearing, especially coming from the executive level. Let's grow our team, let's invest more, let's increase the headcount. I just hate this way of calling the team, but this is typically how people actually talk about the growth of the organization. And the unexpected consequence of growing your team is quite often that things are actually getting slower, not faster. But if that would be the only cost of this whole growth, that wouldn't be a problem. The problem is that the quality doesn't look really like this beautiful brown classic watch. It looks more like that. So it's full of rusty experiences, unfinished things, and broken interactions. And it's just piling up over the years, and nobody really has a control over it. Just keeps growing on us. And it's terrible for the user. Does it sound familiar? I'm sure it does, and it definitely does sound familiar, maybe at a smaller scale, but it does to us at UXPin. So almost a year ago, I started to work on our design operations team, and I started with an inventory of everything that consists of, that our interfaces consist of. I started with colors, right? And I had a couple of talks on our conference in the past about that. But this is the very simple exercise that you can all apply. Just list all the colors that are used across all the interfaces and see what's going to happen. We noticed that, first of all, we had a ton of colors, 146, and we had plenty of colors which are very close to each other, and every single one was represented by a variable in our less files, just adding to the confusion. We went through every single piece of our interface, all the stylistic values, all the components that we use in UXPin, and frankly, we were concerned. And we started to have this discussion with one of the 2 original UXPin designers, with my co-founder and an amazing designer and head of our design, Kamil. How did that happen in such a design-driven organization? How this chaos actually grew on us? And well, going through year after year through the growth of our organization and the product, we really concluded that we never set a standard for our design practice. So with every new project, with every new team member, and we hire only amazing designers, of course, we were just adding to the chaos. Because whenever there is no standard, then everything is chaotic, and we are guilty as charged. That was our reality. It's not anymore. And when you have this unmanaged or mismanaged process of growing design, it truly leads to a lot of user confusion, right? Everything in the interface is meaningful. That's always what I like to repeat. So you think that a shade of blue is just a tiny detail on the design, but it can be crucial to user experience. And when you're not in control of that, it's just breaking everything. Slow design process, definitely, because all the decisions coming from the non-standard process are just, very hard to make. So they take time. high cost of product maintenance, as you can imagine, with unnecessary variables in the system and components, that's just increasing the cost. And cultural tension, because when there's expectation that we are going to build faster and we don't, then the tension is really natural. So all of that is dangerous, and we keep hearing from other companies about this unfortunate situation as well. It feels like roller coaster, it's you're just jumping on board and then you're just losing control. There are ups and downs, of course, there are better and worse projects, but overall you are not in control. So the question is, can you actually avoid it? Is there another way to scale your design process? And of course there is. Design system. And if you treat design system as a first-class citizen, not an afterthought, not the task of actually organizing what already exists, but a natural part of your creation process, then you're set up for scale at any given time. And every project is really part of the system. So the system exists, whether you like it or not. It's just the question how well organized it is and how systematic it is. So design system first is the answer to the challenges that we had with our process and scaling. And I'm sure this is at least part of the answer to on the problems that you might be facing out there. Okay, so what is a design system? That's might be still a little bit confusing, right? So Nathan Curtis, who's definitely one of the best specialists on the subject of design systems, one of the prophets of design systems, truly, because he's talking about systems for years now, said that a design system is really a scalable framework of decisions and team behaviors across a product portfolio to converge on a cohesive experience. Sounds a little bit complicated, but I think it really expresses the essence of a design system as a connection between the reality of our user experience and the team. And one way to understand it is really just to go through documentation websites of all the great publicly available design systems coming from big and amazing companies. So Shopify, for example, I can see that just in their navigation, they have principles, content, visual components, and resources, right? So that tells us how do they use design system in their practice. Lightning design system from Salesforce has guidelines, accessibility, which I do think is very important, components, utilities, design tokens, icons, help and support, right? So there is a little bit of an overlap. And definitely what we can see across all the documentation websites is that design systems collect decisions that the team made about the experience of users and interfaces, guidelines, and resources that the team can use, right? So it's really team-oriented standard that is always kept alive in a company. Sounds expensive, doesn't it, right? I mean, it does sound like something that requires a big team, requires a lot of resources, time, patience in an organization. So the question is that really only for big companies with a lot of cash and certain design maturity? And the answer is no. I do believe that design systems are truly for everyone. But how come? Well, I would say that design system really starts with a way of thinking. It is, in a nutshell, the way in which we are perceiving our practice. It is the process that we actually use every single day whenever we are building even the smallest of projects. And then over time, of course, it expands. It goes to the entire team, across the organization, and it grows on us and becomes better and better. But it starts with a single project and a single designer. And Nathan Curtis, long time ago, said that modular thinking is really necessary in the creation of an amazing cohesive experiences. He said it in a book that I highly recommend, Modular Web Design. It is a couple of years old. It's not available in bookstores. I mean, like you would have to just look for it on eBay. But to this day, I think that's one of the best books about this way of thinking in design that actually enables creation of a design system. It's really all about anticipating the growth of every single project. Even if we are working on something tiny, we have to assume that maybe it will grow over time. Maybe it will become more complex, and we have to be ready for it. My personal rule is that I always expect the greatness of a project. I actually don't want to work on anything that is not up to the standards that I put on myself. I want to do something um, tiny and just a quick project that I can put out there and it's not ready for users. So my standard is always to think in a systemic way because I do expect my projects to be great and I expect them to grow and I expect the collaboration to happen all around them. And having that said, I want to share 4 techniques that you can apply right away and we'll put this whole theory into practice. So the first one, it is a little bit controversial, I'm gonna say, and it might, on the surface, it might seem like it doesn't really fit into the agile way of thinking, but I assure it does. And the first technique is to really ground your work in principles. And like design principles, some people love them, some people hate them. But truth is that they help us organize the way we are thinking about the result of our work. So this is the list that is part of UXPin design system. And this is what we use to design projects at UXPin. And it's a little bit extensive for sure because UXPin has such a powerful and big product. But what I do in my smaller, side projects, I just list these things on a site whenever I start the project. And it can be really like 3 sentences. And that really gives me the sense of direction, right? It tells me that, well, in this particular project, for a given reason, I need to be very mindful in the space of design. I want the design to breathe. I don't want to have overwhelming information density. But on another project, the information density might be crucial to the experience of users. And I would just put that in front of me so I can remember what I'm going after. And I'm using design principles as really something that let me start thinking a systemic way about the whole experience, start with the top level of what I want to create in this process, in the particular process. So a very simple rule, just ground your work in design principles. Have the habit of just write down at the beginning of a project, what do you want to achieve? Number 2, and that's truly a habit, is just keep setting standards, avoid temporary plugs. So it's true to my practice as well. The worst designs and the worst code that I've ever seen, that I ever written or designed, they always start with a single thought. I'll just leave it like that for now, and then we'll see. So something that is a temporary plug is highly probably is going to stay there forever. It's going to cause a lot of problems for you personally, for all your colleagues at work, and for users, right? Because a temporary plug means that somebody didn't put much thought into it, but it's going to exist in the system from now on. So how to avoid that? Very simply, on a design end, we have to have a habit of actually making firm design decisions and saving them, right? So if we decided that a particular shade of gray is the one that we want to, excuse me, use across the entire project, let's just save this shade of gray. Let's give it a name. Let's make sure that it's actually a standard that we are going to apply across the entire interface because it is our decision. If we are deciding that H1 header, the biggest header on the website or in an application, is of a right size and styling, let's save that on a site so we can make sure that the next time we're going to build another header, and it's going to be the most important, the most prominent header on in a given design, we're going to use the same styling. So all these micro decisions that designers tend to make, we have to save them. That's it. And when we are coding, there's a bunch of interesting techniques. These days, I'm mostly using CSS in JS solutions. So I like to actually separate all these stylistic properties into tokens right away. And just make sure that you are naming them consistently across the entire tokens file. So this is basically a collection of objects that collect all the stylistic information so I can control it from a single location. It's very simple, but lets me really scale projects over time without too much of a headache. Okay, and perhaps the most important principle of all, think modular. Build components and divide the experience of users into chunks. And this is the essence of what building in a systemic way looks like. So here's something more of a high level. This is how I see our work as user experience designers. It's really a stairwell or a ladder, if you will, with 4 steps. And the best designers, the best projects really embrace all of them. They embrace the most holistic value, the holistic layer of the experience of users. How do users react to the overall experience of the product? Another step is just the interaction with the interface and how this behavior is being shaped. Then is the thing on its own that is actually visible to the user right now. And then this thing is actually consists of components that we designers put in place and organize as an information for our users. So 4 steps. And now, like being in the industry for quite a while and hopefully helping designers grow, I noticed that sometimes it's really tempting for all of us to just jump between the steps or focus on just one of them for the entire project. And it never ends up in a good place. It's always inconsistent, and it always is below the standards that we would like to see in our work. So working on embracing these 4 steps, it's really essential to the quality of our design work. So just think if you can really recognize these 4 steps in your projects. Do you have techniques that really matches these 4 steps? For example, the design principles are truly about the overall user experience. So just writing them down lets you really explore the area of user experience overall without going straight to the view or straight to components or straight to interactions, right? We have to really go through these steps to make sure that we are providing the best experience. And the last step on the way are components. And I do think this is absolutely crucial to start thinking about components right away when we are starting our design projects. So when I'm designing these days, I'm saving on the side little components for reusing them later. And I do document them, but I'm going to tell you about that more in a second. Some of the projects, including the one that you can see on the screen, I actually started with a collection of components before I created all the views. So I had principles in place so I could kind of expect what I'm going after when it comes to the stylistic value and the overall look and feel, but also when it comes to the content. And then I designed some of the first components before actually organizing the whole screen. In this particular case, this little color swatch was the first component that I designed for the entire project. And then I moved from there. And I'm going to show you how that can look like in a second. But it's important to just grasp the concept that we have to save. We have to save and reuse chunks of our work across the project and across projects in a given product portfolio. And like we keep getting questioned, what is a symbol? When do you actually use a symbol? And well, like symbol is just reusable, synchronized piece of design across all the projects. It's very simple. Symbol as a name is maybe a little bit unfortunate. I believe it came from Illustrator back in the days, but right now it's just pretty much everywhere in every design tool. So whether we like it or not, symbols are here to stay. We used to call them masters. We used to call them patterns, but now it's a symbol, and it's fine. And there's a simple rule. If you use anything more than once, it's a symbol, right? So all your little components, even if you are distributing them in 2 places, you should make a symbol out of them. No matter whether you use UXPin or Sketch or Figma, right? You have to turn that into a symbol. It's going to save you a lot of headache. And from my own practice, I lived through the pain of not using symbols back in the days. And then if there's a single change, it takes hours, if not days, to correct it across all the screens. And it's a pain, right? So in a growing organization, this just habit of using symbols is absolutely crucial. And if you're a coding designer, I highly encourage you to explore the difference between component and a container, which especially if you're using React.js, like that's the fundamental thing, and just coding style, I would say. And it's very useful to think about how that can influence our design practice. So components in the code end tend to be very small. I mean, the smaller they are, it's really the better, the cleaner the code is, and easier to reuse across different projects. And then all these all these components are actually nested in a container that holds the state of the entire application or a chunk of an application. And it doesn't really it's kind of be 100% reflected on the design end. It will be very difficult. because we would have just nested symbols and nested symbols and nested symbols. But the way of thinking about having a container that holds the state and how that actually influences reusability of components, I found it really enriching my design practice. So for those of you who code, I highly encourage you just to think and experiment with the component container architecture across your projects. Finally, if you have your components, if you have your principles, if you have all the micro things saved for later, there's documentation. And like, I'm personally a big fan of documentation. I do document my code extensively for a very simple reason. I tend to actually come back to my projects after a while, right? So I want it to be very visible, so I can just quickly scan the code and know exactly what's going on there, right? And I also expect, which I said previously, I expect that somebody else might join the project, and I want this person to be really in touch with what is out there in code. And I also document design. I document patterns that I'm saving for later, because I want to remember all the limitations on a given pattern. I want to know how I can reuse that across all the other parts of a project or projects, right? So I do document them. It's my habit, and whenever I save them for later. So always assume that your code, your design has to be perfectly understandable for anyone who doesn't have an experience with this particular project. For anyone who's joining, it should be perfectly understandable. Don't take shortcuts, because this is exactly what's causing this accruing chaos over time, right? If we just decide to do something temporary, something small, something fast, it's usually actually coming back to hurt us overall. So just take your time and make sure that your projects are perfectly understandable. The process is very easy, right? If you just apply it to a single project, if you make that your habits, if you keep using the 4 techniques that I mentioned on day-to-day basis, then design system is just growing in place. And you don't have to really spend a lot of time building a design system after all, because it's always out there. It is a first-class citizen in your process. It is something that just works for you on every single project. And this is just a little GIF. I'm going to show you more in a second. But this is a growing design system that I had for this project. And whenever I'm saving something, it's just automatically reflected in the system, right? So if I'm saving the color, right inside my design tool, it's just reflecting in the system. And if I'm saving the pattern, it's just showing up right there, and then I can add documentation and save it for later. So just making the design process always ready for scale. And there's always the question, like, if you design that way, isn't that too limiting for our creative powers? Is that something that's just putting limits on us as designers? The answer is no. It basically lets you save time to work on the parts of design that are non-standard, right? And there's always something that you can actually explore and just make better. But this kind of systemic way of designing gives you the power to reuse elements that are well documented and well tested, and then you're building consistent experiences for users. You're avoiding the chaos. You are in the control of the roller coaster if you are always thinking about systems first. So with that in mind, let me show you really quick couple of examples of how this process looks like in practice. So hold on. Going to reshare my screen, but now straight from the browser. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. So this is the little design system that was growing with the project. Colors, right? So I told you that I'm saving always the colors whenever I'm designing anything. Same with textiles, right? This particular application that it's almost done. It's going to be available for free pretty soon. It is a pretty small application, right? So I just had a very nice typographic scale that I saved over time to make sure that I'm always reusing that on every single screen that I'm designing, every single part of the experience. Assets, I just have a standard icon library that I'm using on all my projects. This is UXPin icon library. So I can always just select the icon that I need and use it across all the designs. And now perhaps the most interesting thing, patterns, right? So For example, let's take this navigation pattern. So I built it once, and I added interactions, and then I'm just reusing that on all the screens. So whenever, and that came in handy really quickly. Whenever I change something in this navigation, I didn't have to go through all the screens and update them manually. They just auto update after the change. And there is documentation because if I'm going to extend the color, this project, I want to know exactly how I can use this component that I wrote, right? So the same thing with search bar. So you can see the granularity of experience, right? There's a search button used here, so nested symbol in the navigation. There's the color swatch, so the crucial part of the system, well documented here with code examples and just a little bit of words. And it's my habit, so whenever I'm designing something, just putting that documentation really quickly in place. So whenever I'm going to reuse that somewhere else, I know exactly what's going on in this project, right? Another nested symbol from the navigation pattern, and another one. So the concept of nested symbols is really, really important. You can use that in UXPin, you can use that in Sketch, of course, right? Very well. So this is the design system that was just naturally growing with the project. But let me show you the project so you can kind of see how that works in practice. So actually, let's start here. So that was the first thing that I designed for this whole project. It's actually a collection of little patterns. So I started with typographic scale. This is one of the very simple ways to organize your design. So kind of just to start with something, like what's going to be part of the experience, like what kind of sizing of text are you going to put in practice and in place, and then you can just scale down in a harmonic way so you can get a good typographic scale. Colors, I believe I added them over time, but I knew that I'm going to start with our shade of blue and the slight gray. I wanted to create this very light experience, and I used UXPin design principles that we use for all of our projects, right? So I started with the set of principles that we already have to create consistent experience. And then that was the first part of the application that I actually designed. So not the entire screen, not the entire experience, but I knew that I'm going to need a color swatch. I need a color swatch that I can extend. I need a color swatch with the additional information about colors that I can use in a bunch of different places. So I started with that, and I say that as a symbol, and then I say that in the library, right? This is where I typically start my projects. It's kind of like a very super minimalistic design system. It's not really a system, it's just a sketch of a system, if you will, just to make my work more organized. And then I started to put together the screens and use interactive patterns. And that was just a much easier task overall, right? I had a single place where I could control all the visual properties. I had the single place to actually make all the changes across the patterns whenever needed. So what I wanted to show you is also, let's assume that I'm building a new page, right? And I can show you how that can be done quickly with this modular approach to design. So let's say, it's going to be a little bit stupid, but let's just call it best color. And let's say that this is the new page that we want to design. So across all the views, right, I have this component, which is navigation. There was a change in the component, so UXPin tells me okay, you can update the component, somebody changed that somewhere else. So yeah, I want to do it in that particular case. I want to have the newest version of a component. So I definitely can be sure now that I'm building something consistent with the rest of the experience. Because I can quickly draw the backgrounds. And we'll just place that right at the bottom. Doesn't have a color in that particular case, so we can just use white. But it does have a border, like all the other screens have a border. So, I could just play with colors right here. But what I really need is I need the color that's consistent across all the screens. So I can just place that thing is coming straight from the design system. Okay. Actually, maybe that's the darker one. So put that. Okay, so you can see border, we have the navigation pattern. And now let's say that we want to put a header in place, right? Something that will just basically say best color. That's very weird, but we want to apply the H1 styling. So I can just click and just apply it right here, right? So we have the best color. And then perhaps we want to, what do we want to have? You have to have the color swatch, right? So again, there was some change in the swatch. So I can drag and drop that and just multiply it a couple of times. So I'm going to have a list of colors. So you see, like building with ready components and having all the other parts of the experience makes it really easy to design a screen that's super consistent with the overall experience, right? So we can check that on preview as well. So let's generate the preview of our design, and here it is. We have the whole screen, and you can see that this is visually really consistent with the rest of the application. And the cool thing is that the interactions actually stay in place, right? So we have this navigation pattern, and now if I will switch to our new part of the application, it's actually connected as well, right? Because it just reuses this one component. So you can see how much time did we actually saved because we used the modules across the entire application. And last but not least, it's all connected to the design system. So let's take a look again at for example, this particular navigation pattern, right? It has a little bit of a documentation. And now my design is really connected to this whole experience. So let me click on the pattern, and UX recognizes that this is a pattern from the color pin design system. So when I click on that, it slows the documentation straight from a design system, but in the context of particular experience. So when I'm designing, I keep using these features also in building this mini design system so I can get this documentation in the context of user action, right? So if we'll click on a swatch, it's telling us, oh, this is a swatch from the design system. So here's the documentation for the swatch, right? So UX automatically recognizes components from the system. And this is, in a nutshell, my design process right now. So I'm really starting with basic components, typographic scales, and a color palette before putting together the screens. And of course, the first thing are always principles, so I can direct the experience I'm designing in the right way. But then modules and all these modular parts of the process, and only then I'm putting together screens. So I have the consistent system just growing step after step, and I'm always ready for scaling these projects infinitely. And that's pretty much it. That's it. So I'm looking forward to your questions. I hope you like the practical side of it, and I hope you can use that to create systemic designs from now on.
Great, thanks, Martin. Yeah, that was fantastic. We will go ahead and run a poll, as we do in all of our webinars. It's good feedback for us to make sure that we are speaking with the right folks and speaking to the challenges that people who attend our webinars experience. And of course, none of this would be possible without the excellent sponsors that we have on board. Atlassian, who is our platinum sponsor, as well as Salesforce, who is a gold sponsor. And the session, of course, with Salesforce has been rescheduled to 12:30 p.m. The webinar links are still the same, so you can still join that with the same login information. And then, of course, with Atlassian, they sponsored our webinar series because they actually have a really robust design team. So if you've used Atlassian products, their Atlassian design team actually supports their entire product suite. So yeah, we're really glad to have them on board as a sponsor. Of course, their team is focused on building powerful experiences for Jira, Confluence, Bitbucket, and all the other Atlassian products. And they're actually now hiring in Mountain View and in Sydney. So if you're curious in checking out a position, I have dropped the link for you there. And of course, Salesforce has an excellent Medium publication where they share a lot of their philosophies and processes for building enterprise products at scale. It's actually a great resource to learn about tactics and strategies. their entire design team contributes to it. I have just dropped in the link here for Salesforce UX. And I'm going to go ahead and drop in the link again for Atlassian's careers page for designers. And of course, we also have a Slack community of almost 6,000 or over 6,000 designers, product managers, and developers. And if you have over 3 years of experience, we highly encourage you to apply. And with that being said, let's go ahead and dive into some of the questions. So one of the interesting questions here is how this person is thinking that doesn't documentation at its core go against agile principles? And so when we handle documentation, then what is kind of that balance, right, between the level of detail and not getting just bogged down by paperwork?
Right. I mean, like some documentation, this is a great question. Some documentation definitely goes against agile principles, right? If you're going to document all the use cases up front, and then you're going to stifle the team with this documentation, yeah, that's anti-agile in a nutshell, right? But the documentation that I'm talking about is really something that you just put into your code whenever you're writing it to make it readable, or you're using a couple of sentences to describe the component in your library. You know, it really doesn't take almost any time, but it definitely saves time over the lifetime of a project. You know, so no, I don't think this is anti-agile. We are run in a really agile way. I also, you know, like the projects that I run on my own are truly agile, and you know, like I don't think this adding this short documentation really slows me down in any significant way. So, you know, like old school PM documentation, absolutely. I'm with the person who asked this question. It's not really agile, but all this tiny documentation on the project level is just a necessity, especially on the code end. I would say that undocumented code, if it's complex, then it might lead to some significant troubles over time.
Right. The next question here is, let's see here. So the next question is, could you clarify a bit on the difference between symbols versus tokens in the design process as well as the design system?
Sure, absolutely. So tokens basically represent the smallest decisions that we as designers make, right? So I believe the whole methodology is actually coming from Gina, formerly of Salesforce, and their work on the design system. So if you're representing the smallest decisions as saved variables in JSON objects or YAML objects, then you have the repository of all these micro elements of the design. So all the colors, all the border radiuses, right, or radiuses, or all sorts of text styles, right? And then you can reuse them over time, but they're controlled from a single location. So tokens are all about the small things, right? Symbols, on the other hand, so symbols are basically components, but used in a design tool. You know, so there are reusable chunks of design that are saved somewhere and reused across all the projects, and all the changes across symbols are coordinated. So if I remember correctly, I might be wrong with the vocabulary here, but I think Illustrator was first to talk about these reusable chunks as symbols, and then Sketch, of course, picked it up, and they built a lot of traction on symbols and great implementation of symbols too. Then Figma, one of the newer tools, also introduced symbols. You know, our symbols in the past were called smart elements, and then we expanded them to symbols. But you know, like the essence of the functionality everywhere is the same. They're truly like just reusable components inside of a design tool. So hopefully that clarifies the differences. And then in the design system, every component in a design system should be actually reflected in your design tool of choice as a symbol. And that's a very important thing, because if you are changing afterwards something in code of the components, right, you want to reflect that in in the symbol in a design tool as well. So you can always get the same truth, right? One truth across these two universes of code and design. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's actually a great kind of explanation of the difference between the two. The next question we have here is actually quite a common question. So this person says, what advice can you give for selling a design system or a modular design process? So saving time over the lifetime of a project seems to be a hard concept for my clients to really understand. Are there any good case studies with harder ROI data that you've seen?
There's not too much. I mean, like I shared a little bit of a way of thinking about ROI of a design system in our guides to design systems. I know that Project 202, which is a great agency working on design systems, had their ROI data about the development cost. So you can find that at their website. I'm not sure, Jerry, if you are able to find the link that quickly. But there are like two pieces of ROI data that I came across. However, in Style Guide podcast, if you guys don't listen to Style Guide podcast, like Brad Frost, you should. And in one of the episodes, unfortunately, I don't remember which one. So, but then it's really good for you to actually listen to all of them. Brad talks about how, I think that was with Dan Moll. I think that was an episode with Dan Moll. I'm sorry, I just remembered that because I think Dan Moll actually from Super Friendly said that it's just out of decency. If you're a freelancer or a small agency, you're supposed to create a design system alongside your project, so the client can over time extend the project and keep the consistency intact. You know what I mean? So if you are trying to persuade the client to build a design system, it's really in the best interest of the client, because otherwise the work that you do as a freelancer or an agency or contractor might not be extendable without the layer of a system in place. It might just lead to chaos, right? And we often see that. Inside of an organization, if you're working in-house, my argument would be actually, number one, if you cannot get a clear buy-in from an organization, if you don't get executive support, stop asking, just start doing it, because it doesn't extend the time needed to complete a project that significantly. Nobody will notice, but then the system will gradually grow. And I talked to many people with similar experiences in which they just didn't ask the organization for a buy-in. They said like, okay, whenever I'm doing a project, I'm going to save components. I'm going to make sure that they're well documented, and I'm going to share that with the teams so they can work faster. So sometimes, it's better not to ask for permission, just do the work. If you believe that this is the right way of designing, it should be your choice in the first place anyway, because it's, if the design is an important part of the organization already, you're going to have an easy time explaining why design systems are so important, because he will just refer to the consistency of user experience, show executives the inventory she used to create the first version of the system, or just document the experience of users. You're going to refer to components that probably already exist on the code end anyway. You're going to say that, yeah, I'm going to connect this too so we can work faster. And typically that works out. If design is not important, no arguments can actually win this battle, except just doing the work and actually working in this modular way, systemic way, and proving over time that design is in better shape, experience of users is great, and we can work faster. So yeah.
Right.
Don't ask, do.
Yeah. The next question here is more of a general question. And I think this applies probably to a lot of folks out there. What would you say are what is the most important advice you could give to small design teams that are about to start a design system?
Oh, that I need to think about. For a small team that starts to work on the system.
Because technically, I mean, we're basically a kind of a small team as well when we started our design system.
Sure. Yeah, that's true. That's true. It was, well, I can't really refer to our experience because it was significantly easier for us because we got right off the bat executive support, right? Because I started this whole journey for our team, and That definitely made a lot of things easier. Um, but maybe there is actually some analogy here, because one thing that we've learned is that you gotta organize if you're committed to actually building a design system and you have the support, so it's not starting really with a single project, but you're going after creation of this system and you can do it in your organization. And I would say that one of the most important experiences that we had is to actually start with a sprint driven organization from day one, meaning that if you have two people who are going to focus on a design system at first, organize their work in a weekly or bi-weekly sprints, right? So there should be a list of tasks. Don't treat it as an impromptu thing that you're going to work on in the meantime. It's either you don't have the support and you're going from a single project and you're just growing it over time, or if you're committed to building a design system for the portfolio of products, then you start with sprints and just keep yourself organized and just build it over time. I think that was crucial to our start in the systems world, because at first we didn't do it and it was very difficult to complete anything. Only when we started to have sprints and just a proper organization of work, then we started to see completion of component after component after component, and then we definitely felt the difference over time. So hope that helps.
Right. And on a related note, someone is curious, do you have any pointers or best practices to create successful feedback loops between the design team or just team that owns the design system and all of the different product and development teams that feed from and into the design system? So really more of a governance question.
Yeah, this is definitely something that we are going through right now, and it's a complex problem. So I would say that number one advice regarding the workflow, you have to, as soon as possible, help the rest of the company, the rest of the organization really own elements of the system. So one thing that we notice at UXPin is that you cannot just like take away design operations team without building all the bridges between them and the team, because that actually creates a lot of tension. So a simple example with a color palette, right? So we worked on an organization of the color palette for a while, and it was based on our existing designs. It was done in my opinion, very logical way. But because some of the designers didn't participate in the process, they felt that this is not going to work, right? So we had to spend some time with them, just explain why this is important and give them the platform to actually express their doubts and suggest changes, right? And it was, and we did make some changes. So one of the most fundamental principles for our design operations team is to always work for our users, and our users are basically the rest of the product development team, all the developers and designers at the company. So we feel that our role is really in service to them. So if they have to participate, they have to give us feedback about the new components. We have to include them in the testing runs for all the components that we are implementing, right? And we do welcome changes. So regarding the feedback loop, if you are organizing in sprints, like at the end of the sprint, there's supposed to be the final meeting summarizing the sprint. And it's a good practice to always invite whoever is interested on the team and welcome feedback, right? So you can perhaps just get some changes done in the next iteration, right? So this is how we work these days, and I found it very helpful to just build a connection with the team. And I think it's important to remember that design operations teams shouldn't be this kind of special forces that are separate from the rest of the company. Design operations is in service of the entire team.
Right. And the next question we have is about, it was about design patterns here. Let me find this. Here we go. When creating a design system, how do you balance all of the stakeholder opinions and decisions that are outside of the designer's control that can either break the standards and or principles that are currently being developed or are already in place?
Oh God, yes, that's a real problem. So that really depends on the setup of your design organization, right? So design principles should not be questioned. by stakeholders. However, of course, in many situations, it's going to be difficult to get the organization to such a shape in which you can tell, like, okay, this is what we agreed we are going to build. So, keep your distance. We're going to do it one way or another, right? That might be difficult for many of you. So I would say that collaboration is the answer to this problem. So you gotta get stakeholders involved in the process. So let's say that on a let's say a big level, right? So you're setting up design principles for the company. Inviting stakeholders to the review meeting of the principles, I think it's crucial. And you have to get their buy-in. Ask them if they disagree with a principle. And naturally, I mean, like if they're not designers, they're going to find it a little bit difficult. They're going to probably have opinions, but it's not like they're going to come up with completely new principles. But they do well. So have a discussion so they can take ownership. Collaboration quite often leads to shared ownership of ideas. Once they feel like they own the principles, and you can involve them in subsequent design reviews to make sure that they actually see these principles in action, you are going to eliminate part of the issue. Now, they can still, of course, object over usage of particular components, right? So it's important to also just keep them in the loop so they can have access to the design system and see the reasons for certain components to exist, right? And in which cases they're used, right, in the overall experience of the in the project. So they have to like co-own it. And over time, you can have them on your side. That's awesome. But I would also say that it's important to for them to understand that they have to respect design, right, and our practice, and they have to understand the whole process to see its complexity. Because one of the fundamental challenges with design is that it seems easy on the surface, especially from the outside, right? And as an easy task, people seem to just put a little value on it, right? And assume that, oh, well, we can change that. I can draw a button, right? So they don't truly understand the meaning. But here's exactly where documentation of components in the system is really helpful. Because with documentation, with just a short description of the use case, you can show how a particular component is built and why it exists in this particular context, right? So you have something to back it up. And then if a particular component, in my practice, I noticed that non-designer stakeholders are sensitive to consistency. So if you're going to tell them, like, listen, I mean, like, we use this particular pattern in a similar context across our product, and using it in this new project in the same context is actually going to provide better user experience, and it's going to be cheaper to build, right? Because we deeply understand this particular component, and implementation is going to be easy. That's really like speaking their language, and it's just much easier to persuade that. That's the power of the system, like you can actually show it in context, and it's just easier for stakeholders to understand. I know this is not it doesn't touch the entire complexity of the issue of working with stakeholders, but I do hope it helps.
Right. And the next question we have is, let's see here. So this is interesting. Some product owners may want to blow up their patterns and styles in an attempt to improve their KPIs. How do you let a team have autonomy but still keep a design pattern or design or pattern library in place to maintain a consistent user experience?
Wow, that sounds like a nightmare. Did work with some difficult stakeholders in the past, so I think I can relate to the feeling in which a stakeholder goes against the best interest of users in an attempt to reach KPIs, which doesn't not always work like that. So I think if the situation is really bad, you cannot reason with the stakeholder, and somebody is just trying to hijack the consistency of design in attempts to reach some KPIs and think that this is going to work. In this situation, I would say let them go with their thing, right? So two possible outcomes if you'll actually go with their way. They might fail, and then they will learn something, and the organization is going to learn something, and next time hopefully it's going to be easier. Or they're going to be successful. And then that's an important information for you as the creator of the design system, because now you know that some of the patterns should be probably added. Maybe the stakeholder was completely right. Maybe some of the KPIs are achievable when we use the specific components that were not part of the system. So we can actually add them, just remember that design system is in service of the entire team and the organization, right? So if there's a lot of tension between design team and a particular stakeholder, I would just give them some space at least once and see what the results are going to be. In my career, I had as an UX manager, so before starting UX Spin, I had this conflict with a stakeholder. And we just, we kind of, all of the designers, we thought that this particular, unfortunately, redesign process is going to lead to failure. It's not going to work out. And we tried to really, argue that there are better ways to go through that, but it was just impossible to do. And so it's not like we planned, let's plan the failure to hurt the stakeholder, but we definitely felt that, okay, let's give this guy a benefit of a doubt, and we'll do whatever he asks for, and then we'll see the results. The results were terrible, and then that really built up the position of my team, because we were saying that they're going to be terrible from the start, and we managed to actually redesign this thing again with a proper process and all of our thoughts, and that was extremely helpful in just building our position in an organization. But sometimes letting something fail, it's a good attitude that you can have inside of a company. I know this is probably not an advice that anybody would give you, but what the hell? That's coming straight out from the history of my practice in design. So hopefully that helps.
Right. And since we are coming up on time, I am going to take the last question here. Unfortunately, we can't get to all the questions. We've had almost 70 questions here. So we will try to get to the questions that kind of cover many other questions in the same theme. I saw some mentions here of getting to the questions. And so this next question, I think, kind of covers the other side of design systems. And this person says, if you're retrofitting a design system into a product that is already in flight and is already maintained by a number of designers and developers spread across multiple locations, what, in your experience, would you say is the most logical first step?
Well, the most logical first step is to create the interface inventory so you can show all the inconsistencies and document them. However, this question might be about the implementation of the system, and I have some thoughts about that. So maybe let's go deeper into that, because this is exactly our case. Like a distributed team, and we are building a system for an existing project. And there are two ways to do it. If you decide to actually keep some existing styling, so let's say that you have a newer part of the product and you're treating that as a source of truth for the rest of the interface. So you know that design components are going to be based on the style of a part of the product, right? So that was our situation. Some companies just connect redesign and creation of a design system, but that wasn't our case. We had part of UXP that we really liked and wanted to use it as a foundation for the rest of the system. So there are two ways in that particular use case to actually proceed. So number one is that you are building a simple, documenting a single component, refactoring code for it, and just implementing it everywhere, right? And then you have total consistency for a given component, but a pretty slow process. And number two, the second way of proceeding with that is basically building a component, doing a test implementation in one part of the interface or the product somewhere, and then telling the development team, like, this is a component, like, look how it's written, like, that's a great thing that you can just use from now on, and you will increase the consistency of code, and hopefully your work will have less of a headache because they're also the automated tests, and it's like done up to our standards and so on and so forth. So two ways, right? Full implementation or partial implementation, let's say. And at UXP, we decided to go with the full implementation, and we have some second thoughts right now. So it's been a while, And we are happy that after introduction of every component to our design systems, in a sprint or two, we can have total consistency of the interface. We definitely see the effect on just decrease of the cost of maintenance of the product, and we're gaining more power. But at the same time, we are thinking like we are not teaching the team the right habits of implementing that over time whenever they're refactoring any part of code. We are limiting ourselves because the process is a little bit slow. So designers have less components in the systems that are ready. That makes sense. So we are actually thinking about switching to the second method, so partial implementation. So a couple of examples of implementation, some training for development and design teams, and just moving forward to the next thing. So it's actually, if you're organizing your design operations teams or thinking about it, it is one of the most important decisions that you have to make. And it's not like you cannot change it over time, but you have to think, like what's going to be right for your organization. And we thought one method is going to be right for us, and now it seems like the other one would be better. So it's impossible to say whether maybe we lost some time the first approach with the full implementation. It's hard to say, but we saw the complexity of the situation, and we decided to maybe let's change our approach. And that's awesome. I mean, overall, that means that we keep learning about our practice, and we just keep improving it over time. And this is what it's all about. Just keep learning.
Right. And on that note, I think we'll close out the session. Thank you, everybody, for joining this webinar today from Martin. We've got some fantastic webinars for you guys in the afternoon as well. You'll be learning about processes and just the overall story of scaling design at Atlassian as well as at Salesforce this afternoon. And in 3 minutes, we are starting our UXPin product demo. So again, this is a pure product demo. If you're considering using UXPin at all, or you're thinking about resolving some issues with design consistency and design efficiency, or using a design system, you might want to check out this demo here. This is our lunchtime product demo, and I've dropped the link in there. And it's going to start in about 3 minutes. Otherwise, Salesforce's webinar has been rescheduled to 12:30 p.m. Pacific. Again, we highly recommend you to join that, because there's a design director there talking about their journey from going from 30 to 580 designers and all of the changes that were required to get there. So that will be an exciting session. And that is starting at 12:30 p.m. Pacific today. And I've included a link here. That starts at 12:30. You guys should have gotten an email already with the updated information as well. So everything is still in motion. And I'll see you in about 2 minutes at our product demo session here. And Martin, yeah, great job.
Thank you all.
All right, take care, everybody. We'll be sending you the sessions by next week, all of the recordings and the slides.